Today we're going to take a look at the numbers behind the Intercessor bolt rifles and try and decide which is best. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So just as everyone was getting comfortable with the Intercessor's rules with their bolt rifles, Games Workshop has thrown us a bit of a curveball by changing the way that doctrines work. In general, in competitive play, I think the majority of people were using stalker bolt rifles, unless you had a specific reason not to, say you were playing a tactical Doctrine chapter or something. Now our armies can no longer hang around in the Devastator Doctrine all game. I thought it would be helpful to have another look at the numbers to see how they perform in a few different situations. I also thought it would be worth the time as well to weigh them up against that auxiliary grenade launcher and see whether it's usually worth the extra 1 point to fire it, and when and if you should. So we'll look at the numbers in the Devastator and Tactical Doctrine, talk about a few other factors like range and things, and try and come to a few conclusions about what we think is best now. So this first table shows the Intercessor bolt rifle's performance against a few likely targets that they might be coming across on the battlefields of Warhammer 40k. I'm sure the stats will be fairly common knowledge to most people here, but the auto bolt rifles shoot 3 shots at 24 inches with strength 4 and AP nothing. The standard bolt rifles are rapid fire weapons with a 30-inch range and AP 1, and the stalker bolt rifles have a 36-inch range, AP -2 and also damage 2, but only fire 1 shot and are heavy weapons. Finally, that auxiliary grenade launcher is a 1-point upgrade that you can give an Intercessor, and that can either choose to fire a standard crack or frag grenade profile. So for each of these examples I've chosen the best choice for the target. So these numbers show the average amount of wounds done by 5 Intercessors shooting in the Devastator Doctrine. So the Stalker bolt rifles will be getting extra AP. I've counted that every weapon will be firing the maximum number of shots and not moving. Against light infantry such as the Guardsmen and Orcs, the auto bolt rifle reigns supreme, with the standard bolt rifle coming in a close second. I did find it interesting that with no extra AP, the auxiliary grenade launcher's frag grenade doesn't actually beat them against either Guardsmen or Orc boys. So unless you're in a squad of stalker bolt rifles, then it's not going to help you out at all in this situation. When we come to shoot down some more armoured targets such as tactical marines, the auto bolt rifles and standard bolt rifles also win here. The extra AP of the standard bolter helping catch up with the auto version. Both the stalkers and the auxiliary grenade launcher are a fair bit behind. If we turned our guns on some enemy Intercessors, then stalker bolt rifles are pretty much built for this, particularly in Devastator Doctrine. Having flat 2 damage means that the stalkers just massively win out against these guys, and everything else is pretty much equal but a fair bit behind. The same is even more true against Terminators. Extra AP really counts when you're firing at 2 wound 2+ save targets. Though interestingly, if we fire at a slightly tougher target, particularly Primaris aggressors and things, then the grenade launcher actually comes into its own here, where it is the strongest choice of the lot. If you don't have an auxiliary grenade launcher along though, then the stalker bolt rifle is definitely your best bet against aggressors, as it is against vehicles, and it beats out the grenade launcher by a long way again, as the extra strength doesn't count for anything at all against toughness 7 vehicles. So overall, while you're in Devastator Doctrine, basically stalkers are the best bet for anything Intercessors or tougher, and auto bolt rifles are the best for any light infantry or 1 wound infantry with 3+ saves. The standard bolt rifle's a bit more middle of the road, fairly good against hordes, but not really any better than the auto against hard targets. And the grenade launcher's an interesting case. It's not terrible against hordes, but you're still better off firing one of these standard variants that isn't a stalker. It's only really any better than any of them when you're targeting aggressors. Firing against toughness 5 or maybe toughness 6 models is really its sweet spot, where it is a fair bit better, but otherwise it just compares very poorly with firing a standard bolt rifle for an upgrade. Let's move over to taking a look at the Tactical Doctrine damage output now. Now we've moved over to Tactical Doctrine, the Stalker bolt rifle is only AP 2, the standard bolt rifle is AP 2 as well now, as it's AP 1+1, and the auto bolt rifle gains a very important single point of AP. Unfortunately, the auxiliary grenade launcher doesn't gain anything from this, as it's still a grenade weapon, even if it's fired at 30-inch range. As expected, this gives the bolt rifle and auto bolt rifle a really hefty advantage over the stalker. They only increase their lead against light infantry and tactical marines, with the auto bolt rifle edging out the bolt rifle even further due to AP -1 being more valuable on an AP 0 gun than an AP 1 gun already. Interestingly enough, the auto bolt rifle also catches up in terms of damage output against Intercessors, the 3 shots at AP -1 being slightly better than the 1 shot at AP -2 with 2 damage that the Stalker has. I found this one quite surprising, to be honest, as I was just intuitively thinking that the 2 damage Stalker would pretty much always have the advantage against Intercessors. Against Terminators they're pretty much all even, besides the Grenade Launcher, which is worse. The Grenade Launcher still retains a slight advantage against aggressors, and funnily enough the Auto Bolt Rifle actually very slightly wins against vehicles as well, with the Stalker and Standard Bolt Rifle being in second place. So overall, from a raw damage output perspective, now we're forced to cycle from Devastator to Tactical Doctrine turn 2. The Auto and Standard Bolt Rifles are massively more appealing. Stalkers still win against hard targets when they're in the Devastator Doctrine, but they actually now lose out against the same hard targets to the Auto Bolt Rifle in the Tactical Doctrine, provided you can get it in range. If you cycle through to Assault, then the Stalker Bolt Rifle will still be better against hard targets, but only slightly compared with when in the Devastator Doctrine. Of course, first turn is very important, but overall I think that the Auto Bolt Rifle now has the better generalist all-round damage dealing profile. In terms of the Grenade Launcher, unfortunately it's just really not very overwhelming against the vast majority of targets. Unless you're targeting things that are literally toughness 5 or toughness 6 with the crack grenade mode, you're always going to be better with something else, typically either the Auto or Standard Bolt Rifle. It's still very cheap for 1 point to give you this flexibility against these sort of targets, but I'm on the fence if it's even worth it as an upgrade when it's literally only 1 point. I think the bottom line is that you just shouldn't be getting hung up about grenade launchers. They're never going to change the world compared with your standard bolt rifles. So let's talk about a few other factors that might influence your decision between these guns. Firstly, we need to try and bring their maximal firepower to bear, and each of them has their own challenges. The standard bolt rifle has a decent range and can fire its 2 shots at that range, but only if the squad bearing it remains stationary, otherwise their threat range is quite limited, between the 6-inch move and then 15-inch range. If it's not firing 2 shots, then it's significantly weaker than the other options. It was only barely competing with the other 2 when it's firing its full 2 shots, so it really needs to be if you want to be considering it. The Auto Bolt Rifle of course has the shortest range, but of course you can freely move and fire it, so it's kind of a threat range 30, provided your Intercessors are happy moving up towards the enemy. In addition, it has the option to advance should it need to be, never one that you actually need to take if you don't want to. But should you need that extra little bit of movement, then it can still keep up pretty decent firepower even when your Intercessors are hoofing it across the board. The Stalker of course has the best range, and this is a significant advantage. It means the Intercessors can decently engage the foe even when they're a fair bit back from the main battle line, and they'll have better choice of targets. The heavy penalty is a bit of a downside though in terms of moving and shooting, as sometimes you are going to want to move. Unless you've got a way to mitigate it, then it's a significant drop in your damage output. We should also remember the unique stratagems that are available to the Intercessors. The Bolt Rifle has 2 command points to be able to be a rapid fire 2 weapon, so essentially double up on its firepower. This rapid fire stratagem is really solid in terms of the amount of damage you get out of it for the command points. Obviously, to be maximally taking use of it, you'd be wanting to use it on a big squad of Intercessors, something like 10 of them, that hopefully also has additional rerolls from captains and lieutenants and things on it. Getting anything up to an extra 20 bolt shots on the enemy for 2 command points is pretty good in my book. Also, if you absolutely need all of their shooting and you also need to move, you can pay the 1 command point for steady advance to still move and double fire the weapons at 30-inch range. But still, compared with the others, that isn't exactly great. That's just keeping it at the same level that you'd hope it to be at. So steady advance is more a stratagem for when you're caught short than one that I'd actually plan to use. The Auto Bolt Rifle has the 2 command point stratagem for auto hitting when you're within half range. This one's called Bolt Storm, and it's not bad considering your squad could be firing 30 shots, but it's just not quite as good as rapid fire for the standard bolt rifles. When you're firing a full squad of these guys, you'll get less extra hits with the Auto Bolt Rifles, and those hits are a bit weaker than the standard bolt rifle ones due to having less AP. It's also less flexible because you have to be very up close to do it. Again, it can get you some extra damage, but it's nowhere near as good as the rapid fire one for the standard bolt rifle. Finally, the Stalker Bolt Rifle has the interesting 3 command points for targets sighted. This is the one that allows them to target characters and also gets them mortal wounds on wound rolls of 6 or more. Now this one is good and it can be game changing, but it is very pricey. You're both giving up all the fun stuff that you could do with those 3 command points, and also likely the squad's entire shooting for a turn, as they'll probably be wanting to throw everything into that given character. It is a nice option to have, but it has a high opportunity cost in my opinion. Possibly one of the most important things between choosing between the 3 guns is the chapter tactic and chapter specific doctrine that you're going to be using. Most of them push you in one way or another towards one of the variants. Ultramarines are best for the standard bolt rifle usually. Being able to move and shoot means that they can rapid fire at 30-inch range the entire time. And they're actually not too bad for the stalkers either, being able to move and shoot for no penalty when in tactical Doctrine. White Scars have great synergy with the auto bolt rifle. They can advance and charge, the auto bolt rifle can shoot when you advance, so it's a nice match for extra damage in the shooting phase and the assault phase. Iron Hands go very well with the Stalker Bolt Rifle, being able to move and shoot and reroll wands in the first turn with Devastator Doctrine. Raven Guard get their bonus for hurting characters in the Tactical Doctrine, which synergizes well with the Rapid Fire and Assault variants, but the Stalker could also be handy for that target-sighted stratagem. Salamanders have a unique Tactical Doctrine, so favour the Tactical variants, although their rerolls synergize better with the low shot rate of the Stalkers. Imperial Fists are pretty good with any of these, having extra shots with bolt guns and also ignore cover. The ignore cover being most helpful on the low AP auto bolt rifle. Of course, their unique Devastator Doctrine amps up the Stalker though, being 3 damage against vehicles in turn 1. Blood Angels and Black Templars likely synergize best with the auto bolt rifle, being wanting to move forward towards the enemy, meaning that they'll be likely getting that auto bolt rifle in range a lot easier, and it gives them the option to advance, and the same goes for Space Wolves. Dark Angel's additional range helps out all the variants, but particularly the auto variant in first turn, before getting an extra AP in later turns when it likely might be in range. Finally, Deathwatch have good synergy with any of them, but the auto bolt rifle is probably my favourite, as 3 shots with special issue ammo is pretty decent. Finally, and also very importantly, is that you need to consider which gun you want within the context of your greater army. I think one of the reasons that people really like running the Stalker variants is that Space Marines have a lot of good access to lots of cheap bolt shots for anti-horde. Things like Aggressors or Assault Centurions do this absolutely excellently with all of the shots they can fling down range, meaning that extra shots with auto bolt rifles, for example, are a little bit wasted if you're pretty certain that you're going to be targeting vehicles and things. Now we know that we are forced to move through the Doctrines though. As we've seen from the tables, this has flipped a bit, and the auto bolt rifle is actually one of the best against hard targets as well. I genuinely think that this might mean that we see a lot more of it in more competitive lists. So overall, the auto bolt rifle has really risen in my opinion since the Doctrine changes. It has great damage output and flexibility, but frankly they are all good though. The standard bolt rifle for its amazing stratagem and good synergy with things like Ultramarines, the Stalker for its better damage against hard targets at long range, and again good synergy with the Devastator Doctrines. For me, taking the grenade launcher is really take or leave, and it doesn't really matter much either way. One command point for giving your squad slightly more damage against toughness 5 targets is cheap but not an enormous difference. So let me know your opinions then. What are your favourite bolt rifles and why? And has the Doctrine change affected the way that you might run your Intercessors going forward? Thanks very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. It's been fun to look into the maths of these guys again. If you found the video interesting, then feel free to subscribe, as we have plenty of 40k content, including a bunch of Math Hammer things coming out fairly regularly. If you are enjoying the videos and are watching regularly, then I do have a Patreon page down in the description below. Patreon is basically how this channel is funded. That's the reason that I can spend quite so much time making videos every day. So if you are watching quite a bit, any support is greatly appreciated, even if it's a small amount each month. And a big thank you to the channel's current Patreons for making this all possible. Again, thanks very much for listening. I'll hope to see you guys next time.